The morning they put me on that plane, I knew exactly what I would find if I turned around. So I didn't turn around. I just walked straight ahead, my feet feeling like they were dragging 2 blocks of cement, while behind me my own sons stood there pretending to be sad, and failing to hide the relief shining in their eyes. My name is Clemencia. I was 74 years old that day. And that was the day I learned that the deepest betrayal in this world doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the children you fed, the children you raised, the children you protected from the cold with your own body. It had started 3 months earlier, on a grey Sunday afternoon that smelled like wet earth and fresh coffee. Rain was hitting the windows of my old house, the house I had lived in for 50 years. I was in the kitchen drying my mother's old ceramic plates when my older son, Roberto, walked in. His back was straight, his face was tight, that posture he always had when he was bringing bad news, or worse, bad business. Behind him came Julian, my younger son, eyes glued to the floor like always, walking in his brother's shadow. "Mom, we need to talk," Roberto said, sitting down at the head of the table. That seat had belonged to my husband, Rogelio, who had been dead for years. I dried my hands on my apron and sat across from them. The silence in that room was thick, heavy, electric. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Julian was nervously playing with the salt shaker, not looking at me. "We're worried about you, old lady," Roberto began, in that voice people use for children or for the mentally ill. "This house is too big. The stairs are dangerous. The maintenance costs too much. And well, you're not really up for all this anymore." "I'm perfectly fine, Roberto," I said, my voice steady, even though inside my heart was pounding. "I go up and down those stairs 10 times a day. I take care of my garden. I cook my own food." "For now," Julian whispered, like he was reading from a script someone had written for him. "But Mom, last week you forgot where you put your keys." "Everyone loses their keys, Julian," I snapped, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "You're 40 years old and you lose your wallet every single month." Roberto sighed, that long theatrical sigh that meant his patience was running out. He pulled a glossy brochure from his leather bag and slid it across the table toward me. On the cover, an elderly couple smiled in front of a lake. The title read, El Romanzo, Peace and Tranquility. "It's not a nursing home, Mom," Roberto said quickly, seeing the horror on my face. "It's a retirement community. Far from the city, the smog, the noise. It's exclusive. Julian and I moved heaven and earth to get you a spot there. Nurses around the clock. Huge gardens. You'll live like a queen." I picked up the brochure. The paper felt cold and slippery in my hands. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from a fury that was beginning to boil inside me. "And this house?" I asked, looking straight into their eyes. There was a quick exchange of glances between the 2 brothers. Fast. Almost invisible. But I caught it. That was the exact moment the blindfold fell from my eyes. There was no concern for my health at that table. There was only greed. "The house? Well, we'll take care of it," Roberto said, clearing his throat. "Maybe we'll rent it out to help pay for your stay there, which isn't cheap, I promise you. Or maybe it needs some major repairs. Don't worry about that now. What matters is your well-being. Raise crows and they'll peck out your eyes." My grandmother's old saying echoed in my mind. How right she had been. I had raised these 2 men with all the love in the world, working bent over a sewing machine until dawn to pay for their college after their father died. And now they were throwing me away like an old piece of furniture that didn't fit the new decor. The weeks that followed were suffocating. It wasn't a war fought with screaming. It was something quieter, crueler, a slow psychological torture. "Mom, you left the stove on," Roberto would say, when I knew I had turned it off. "Mom, you look so tired today. So pale." They started treating me like I was an invalid. Real estate agents started showing up unannounced, looking at my walls like they already owned them, measuring with their eyes where they'd knock down walls to make open spaces. I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed. Because I was watching. At 74, I learned that silence is a weapon. If I argued, they'd call me unstable. If I cried, they'd call me crazy. So I chose the dignity of silence instead. The night before the flight, while I packed, I felt like they were peeling my skin off in strips. I couldn't take my furniture, my paintings, my mother's dishes. Only the essentials. You'll have everything furnished there, they had told me. I stood in front of my open closet. What mattered wasn't the clothes. I reached under the bed and pulled out an old rusted tin box, the box where I kept my real treasures. Letters from Rogelio when we were young. My grandmother's handwritten recipes, stained with oil. A small cloth pouch with seeds from my favorite plants, basil, rue, sunflower seeds from my last harvest. I hid that tin box deep in my suitcase, wrapped in my wool sweaters. I also packed Rogelio's old pocket watch, wrapped in a scarf. It didn't work anymore, but if you held it to your ear, it felt like you could still hear the ghost of his heartbeat. Those were my weapons. I didn't bring jewelry or cash. Roberto had taken over managing my bank accounts to make things easier for me. The morning of the flight was a gray blur. The car ride to the airport was silent. Julian drove. Roberto sat in the front, scrolling through his phone. I sat in the back, watching the city, my home for 50 years, disappear behind the glass. We passed the park where I taught them to ride bikes. The church where I had them baptized. The cemetery where their father was buried. They didn't look at any of it. They only looked forward. Toward their future. Without the burden. At check-in, Roberto did everything efficiently. Almost too efficiently, like they were in a hurry to get rid of me. All set, Mom. You've got the window seat, just how you like it, he said, handing me the boarding pass with a forced smile. The flight is short. There'll be a driver waiting for you with a sign. The place is called El Remanso. It's a real paradise. And you too? I asked, just to see what lie they'd come up with. We'll come visit you next month. I promise, Roberto said, kissing my forehead with cold, dry lips. Julian hugged me, and in that hug I felt him trembling. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. He was always the weak one, dragged along by his older brother's ambition. Take care, Mom, Julian whispered. Goodbye, sons, I said. Not, I love you. Not, see you soon. Just goodbye. I walked through the boarding tunnel, the cold air conditioning seeping into my bones. The plane smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. I sat in seat 12A, holding my bag tight against my chest, feeling the hard shape of the tin box inside it. As the plane took off, I felt a pressure in my chest threatening to break into sobs. I watched the houses below shrink into nothing. My house. My garden. My entire life, left behind, at the mercy of two men who had forgotten the fourth commandment. I closed my eyes and remembered Rogelio's words, from the economic crisis of '98, when we lost everything and had to start over selling food on the street. He had taken my tired, calloused hands and said, Clemencia, woman of iron, as long as we have our health and our dignity, nothing can sink us. I opened my eyes. Nothing can sink me, I whispered to myself, so quiet the man beside me couldn't hear. The flight lasted 2 hours. We landed in a rural province. Green, slow, humid. The air was thick with the smell of vegetation and red earth. A young man in a beige uniform held up a sign with my name. Mrs. Clemencia, he asked kindly. I'm Matteo. I'll take you to El Remanso. The drive took another hour, through back roads surrounded by jungle and banana plantations. Beautiful, yes, but also a golden cage. I was in the middle of nowhere. If I ever wanted to escape, there'd be nowhere to go on foot. El Remanso was, I admit, beautiful. An old restored mansion with wide corridors and gardens full of tropical flowers. But when I got out of the car and saw the other residents sitting in rocking chairs on the porch, staring blankly at the horizon, I understood the truth. This wasn't a retirement home. It was an elegant warehouse where people waited to die. A plump, smiling nurse greeted me. Dona Clemencia, what joy! Your sons called to confirm you arrived safely. Come, let's show you your room. Number 14. It has a view of the orchard. The room was clean, impersonal, smelling of new furniture. I set my suitcase on the bed. The nurse lingered at the door. Dinner is at 6, Dona Clemencia. Everything here is very calm. You'll rest a lot. When she closed the door, I stood in the middle of that strange room. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of crickets. I went to the window. The view looked out over a neglected orchard, and beyond it, a stone wall marking the edge of the property. I opened my suitcase. I took out Rogelio's photo and placed it on the nightstand. Then I took out the tin box and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was too soft. This wasn't my bed. This wasn't my home. One single tear rolled down my cheek, hot and salty. I let it fall. It would be the only one. My sons thought they had sent me here to wither away. They thought, far from everything familiar, my mind would finally break, that I would become that docile old woman who signs papers without reading them and forgets her own name. They thought the silence of the countryside would shut my voice forever. How little they knew their mother. I got up, washed my face with cold water, and looked in the mirror. The wrinkles were there. 7 decades of laughter and tears carved into my skin. My white hair was messy from the trip. But my eyes, my dark eyes, still had that same defiant spark they had when I faced down creditors 20 years ago. Calm down, I said out loud, testing my own voice in those 4 walls. We'll see. That first night, I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the sounds of the house, the nurse's footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the fridge. My mind, far from shutting down, started working at a speed I hadn't felt in years. I analyzed everything with the cold precision of a general on a battlefield. They had taken my house, my routine, my friends, and exiled me with a promise of monthly visits I knew, deep in my bones, they would never keep. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated me. They saw a frail old woman. I knew I was a survivor. At dawn, when the first rays of sunlight slipped through the cheap curtains, I no longer felt sadness. What I felt was a determination as cold and hard as steel. I put on my best dress, fixed my hair, and walked out into the hallway before anyone else woke up. The dining hall was empty. I walked to a window facing the back patio, and there it was. At the far end of the property stood an abandoned greenhouse, its glass dirty, its frame covered in vines. My sons had sent me here so I'd stop being a bother. They told me I'd find peace here. What they didn't know was that peace wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for a purpose. And looking at that ruined greenhouse, I knew I had just found my trench. They thought this was the end of my story. They had no idea they were only writing the prologue of my rebirth. The days at El Remanso crawled by like slugs on a lettuce leaf. The routine there was designed to numb the soul. Breakfast at 8. Assisted walk at 9. Nap at 2. Dinner at 6. Dead silence at 8. For most residents, that was heaven's waiting room. A soft, padded place where the only goal was not to slip in the shower. But for me, Clemencia, every hour of doing nothing was a spoonful of poison. For the first 2 weeks, I faked obedience. I took the colored pills they gave me in little plastic cups. Pills supposedly for blood pressure and mood. But my body, wise as old wood, sent me the first warning. Half an hour after taking them, a thick fog settled over my mind, a heaviness on my tongue that made it hard to think clearly. One Tuesday morning, watching a hummingbird try to drink nectar from a plastic flower in the lobby, suspicion turned into certainty. Those pills weren't vitamins. They were chemical muzzles. Roberto and Julian didn't just want me far away, they wanted me erased. They wanted the dementia they had invented to become real through medication. That same night, I started my quiet rebellion. When the night nurse, a careless young woman named Solange, handed me my pills, I pretended to swallow. I tucked the pills under my tongue, the bitter taste dissolving slowly, and waited until she left. Then I spit the poison into a potted plant in my bathroom, a half-dead plant nobody cared about. I did it every night, religiously. By the third day without swallowing that filth, the fog lifted. My thoughts became sharp again, like butcher's knives. I remembered phone numbers, street names, recipes, and most of all, I remembered who I was before my sons decided I was a burden. With my mind clear, I moved to phase 2 of my plan, the greenhouse. That dirty, rotting structure became my sanctuary and my cover story. I convinced the director, a woman named Magda, drowning in maintenance costs, to let me work there. Dona Clemencia, that place is full of debris. It's dangerous, she'd said, adjusting her glasses. More dangerous is a woman like me, bored, staring at walls, Magda, I replied, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Besides, if I fix up that garden, the kitchen gets fresh vegetables for free. Think about it. Savings. The word savings was the master key. They gave me gloves, old tools, and full permission. I spent the first month clearing it out. I ripped weeds out with a fury that had nothing to do with gardening and everything to do with my own pain. Every root I pulled from that hard soil felt like ripping out the pain my sons had planted in my chest. It was in that greenhouse where I found my secret weapon. Not buried treasure, but an unexpected ally. His name was Anselmo. He was a thin man, around 80, always dressed in a full suit despite the heat, a silk handkerchief in his pocket. He sat on a stone bench near the greenhouse, watching me work. One day, while I was pruning some unruly rose bushes, he cleared his throat. You've got good technique, Dona Clemencia. You're not afraid of the thorns. Thorns only prick you if you hesitate, Don Anselmo, I answered without turning. What did you do before they deposited you here? A short silence. I was a notary public for 45 years in the capital. I saw the biggest scandals of the best families cross my desk. Inheritances, frauds. I can smell betrayal from miles away. I stopped. I set down my pruning shears and turned to face him. His eyes shone with an intelligence his frail body could barely contain. And what do you smell now, Anselmo? I asked. I smell that you're not here because you forgot your keys. I smell that you're here because you're in the way. And I smell that you're planning something, because nobody cleans glass with that kind of rage unless they're planning to see something very clearly through it. I smiled, for the first time in months, a real smile. I need a lawyer, Anselmo. Or at least, the mind of one. That afternoon, sitting among bags of fertilizer, I told him everything. The house. Roberto's manipulation. Julian's weakness. The power of attorney they'd pressured me to sign years ago, for small paperwork. Anselmo listened with his eyes closed, nodding slightly. A general power of attorney is dangerous, Clemencia. But there's one thing greedy children always forget. The law protects the roof over an elderly person's head, if you know which article to invoke. Tell me, was the house registered to both you and your late husband? Yes. And we never formally settled the inheritance after he died. We just kept living there. His eyes lit up with a mischievous spark. That complicates things for them. Without that settlement, and without your signature in person, they can't legally sell, unless they have you declared mentally incompetent. If a judge rules you're unfit, your oldest son, as your legal guardian, can sign in your place. A cold chill went through my stomach. The pills. The isolation. It all made sense. They were building the case for my madness, to present to a judge. I need to know what they're doing, I said, fists clenched. I need to see my accounts, the property records. But I don't have a smartphone. They took it, said it confused me. Anselmo pulled a sleek modern phone from his jacket. My granddaughter gave it to me. She thinks I use it for solitaire. But it has internet, and I still have my access codes to the public notary registry. Old notaries never fully disconnect, Clemencia. It's a bad habit. For the next few weeks, the greenhouse became our command center. While I planted tomatoes and basil as cover, Anselmo connected to the outside world. I learned to use the touchscreen with my calloused fingers. Technology wasn't hard. What was hard was having the patience to understand it. And patience was something I had plenty of. What we found chilled my blood. In the property registry, my house, my home of 50 years, had a preventive sale notation. A purchase agreement signed 2 weeks earlier. The buyer was a construction company known for demolishing old neighborhoods to build apartment towers. But that wasn't the worst part. Anselmo, using old contacts and a few discreet calls pretending to be a former colleague, discovered there was an open medical file under my name at a private clinic in the capital. A psychiatrist I had never met had signed a preliminary diagnosis: advanced senile dementia, with episodes of aggression. "They're killing me while I'm still alive, Anselmo," I whispered, staring at the screen, tears of rage in my eyes. "Are they erasing me?" "Not yet," Anselmo said, placing his bony hand on my shoulder. "The competency hearing is scheduled for 2 months from now. They need that ruling to close the sale. The construction company's notary will require either your signature or a court order. They're in a hurry, Clemencia. And hurry is the mother of mistakes." I wiped my tears with the back of my dirt-covered hand. The woman who used to cry for her ungrateful sons no longer existed. The Clemencia standing there among the sprouting seedlings was something else entirely. A hard route. "What do we do?" I asked. "You need proof of life, irrefutable proof of sanity. And you need money. Without money, we can't move paperwork." I smiled. "Money isn't a problem, Anselmo. But they control your accounts. They control the accounts they know about." That night, alone in my room, I pulled out the tin box from under my sweaters. I took out Rogelio's old pocket watch, pried open the back with my fingernail, the part nobody ever opens. Inside, folded into a tiny square, was a piece of tissue paper. And beneath the velvet lining of the box itself was more paper, hidden the day of Rogelio's funeral. 3 small bars of pure gold, which my husband had bought during the '98 crisis, just in case paper money becomes worthless. And a diamond ring that had belonged to my great-grandmother, a jewel I never wore and never showed my sons, so they wouldn't sell it off in some moment of youthful recklessness. I had the capital. I had the strategist. And I had the will. The next day, we set the plan. I couldn't confront them by phone. If they suspected I knew, they'd speed up the process, or worse, move me somewhere with no Anselmo, no greenhouse. I had to let them think their plan was working perfectly. "Magda," I told the director that afternoon, bringing her a basket of fresh radishes, "I'm so happy here. My sons were right. This air has healed my nerves." Magda smiled, relieved. "I'm so glad to hear that, Dona Clemencia. Actually, your son Roberto called earlier, asked how you were. I told him you're very calm, that you spend your days in the garden, talking to the plants." "Perfect," I said, knowing that talking to plants would sound to my sons like confirmation of my madness. "Tell them to come whenever they want. Tell them I'm not angry anymore. That I understand it was for the best." It was the sweetest lie I had ever told. I started keeping a detailed journal, not a diary of feelings, but a logbook. Every conversation with staff. Every pill I was given and secretly hid as evidence in a bag in the greenhouse. Every date, every detail of the weather and world news, to prove my sharpness in any courtroom. Anselmo, meanwhile, contacted a former intern of his, now a feared lawyer in the capital, Dr. Barrientos. We sent him photos of the documents through Anselmo's phone. Barrientos took the case on one condition: I want to see Roberto's face when his little act falls apart. 4 months passed. The garden at El Romanzo flourished, outrageously. Tomatoes red as hearts, giant squash, crisp lettuce. Other residents, infected by my energy, started coming out of their stupor. We organized harvest afternoons. The place stopped feeling like a cemetery and started feeling like a community. I was its undisputed leader, the matriarch of the tomatoes. My arms grew strong. My skin turned golden in the sun. I was no longer the pale old woman who had boarded that plane. Then came the call. It was Roberto's secretary. He didn't even have the courage to call himself. Mrs. Clemencia, your sons will be visiting this weekend. À surprise. They're bringing some documents for you to sign, routine insurance paperwork, you know. I hung up the phone in the lobby with a calm that felt almost eerie. Routine paperwork, I murmured. I knew exactly what those papers were. The final commitment. Or maybe the authorization for permanent admission to a closed psychiatric facility. They were coming for the final blow. Coming to harvest what they thought they had planted. A weak, confused old woman. I went to the greenhouse. Anselmo was reading a book. They're coming Saturday, I said. He closed the book with a snap. Then we're ready, Clemencia. I've never been more ready in my life. I looked at my hands. Dirt under the nails. Hands that had brought life back to that wasteland. Anselmo. Call Barrientos. Tell him to be here Saturday at 10, parked in the back where his car won't be seen. And tell Magda to make coffee. We're having a very interesting family reunion. That night before sleeping, I held Rogelio's watch to my ear. The ghost ticking was still there, marking the time of justice. Get ready, Roberto. Get ready, Julian, I whispered into the darkness. You think you're coming to see a senile old woman resting. You have no idea you're walking straight into the lion's den. I fell asleep without pills, with the calm of someone who has sharpened the axe enough. The trap was set. And my dear sons were walking right into it. Saturday morning came thick with heat, the kind that sticks to your skin like a second layer, the kind that promises a storm. I got up at 4 in the morning. Not because old age stole my sleep, but because a general doesn't sleep on the day of battle. I washed my face with cold water and looked in the cracked bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had no fear left. Dark circles, yes. White hair pulled into a tight bun. But deep in my eyes burned a quiet, controlled fire, ready to set the world on fire if it had to. I dressed in old work clothes, a linen blouse, a wide skirt. I wanted them to see me like that. Rustic. Harmless. Blended into the landscape. I made sure to leave a little dirt under my nails, a smear of chlorophyll on my hem. The performance had to be perfect. For Roberto and Julian, I had to be the old woman who'd lost her grip on reality. The woman who found more joy talking to worms than checking her bank statements. I walked toward the greenhouse. Anselmo was already there, immaculate as always, in his pressed shirt. Everything's ready, Clemencia, he said quietly, polishing his glasses. Dr. Barrientos arrived half an hour ago, came through the kitchen service door. He's settled in the tool shed, behind the fertilizer sacks. Did anyone see him? Only Magda. And bless her, she understands today is a day of justice. I told her he's a health inspector checking pesticides. She'll serve the coffee and disappear. I walked to the small wooden shed at the back of the greenhouse, separated only by a thin wall that let every whisper through. Dr. Barrientos, I called softly. A deep voice answered from the shadows, where the smell of fertilizer and rusted metal was strongest. I'm here, Dona Clemencia. Don't worry about me. I have water, my recorder, and patience. You do your part. Make them talk. We need their intent, the sale, the medical fraud, all of it, straight from their own mouths. I'll come out when I hear the key word. Cosecha, I repeated. Harvest. Understood. Good luck, ma'am. Today you get your life back. I went back to the center of the greenhouse and sat down to wait. I wasn't nervous. What I felt was an electric vibration in my hands, the same feeling my father used to get gripping his machete before clearing the brush. At 10 sharp, the sound of a powerful engine broke the peace. Not the wheeze of the supply van. The smooth, arrogant purr of an expensive car. I stood and started pruning dead leaves off the tomato plants, my back to the entrance. I wanted them to find me like that. Absorbed. Small. Disconnected. I heard their footsteps on the gravel, Roberto's hard Italian leather shoes, Julian's softer loafers dragging behind. Mom. Roberto's voice sounded strange, like he couldn't quite believe that hunched figure among the plants was the same woman who once taught him to tie his shoes. I turned slowly, with a rehearsed smile, the same vacant smile I'd seen on so many medicated residents. My boys! I exclaimed, throwing my arms open, pruning shears still in my hand. You came. I knew you would. The petunias told me this morning. I saw the look they exchanged. Fast. Like a whip crack. Roberto raised an eyebrow at Julian, and in that gesture I read everything. See. Completely crazy. This'll be easy. Julian looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Guilt weighed on his shoulders, but cowardice weighed more on his feet. Hi, old lady, Roberto said, leaning in for an air kiss, not actually touching my skin, like old age was contagious. You look different. Very rustic. It's the air, Roberto. The air here has vitamins, I said with a high, silly little laugh. Come. Sit. Look at my tomatoes. They're huge. Bigger than your problems, right? I led them to the wicker chairs. Roberto wiped his seat with a handkerchief before sitting, looking with disgust at the dust. Julian slumped down, loosening his tie. They were sweating. The heat in the greenhouse, amplified by the glass, was suffocating for them, used to their air-conditioned glass offices. For me, it was a warm womb. We don't have much time, Mom, Roberto said, getting straight to the point, as always. The flight back is in 4 hours, and the road to this place is long. Oh, what a shame, I sighed, stroking a basil leaf. I thought you'd stay for lunch. Magda was going to make stew. No thanks, Julian said quickly, grimacing. Mom, we came because there's some paperwork. Boring stuff. Paperwork? I asked, widening my eyes, playing innocent. But I don't have any paperwork anymore, son. I don't use money here. Only seeds. Roberto pulled a leather folder from his bag. The zipper sounded like a gun being loaded in the silence of the greenhouse. Anselmo, dozing on a bench across the way with a straw hat over his face, shifted one leg slightly. That was the signal. He was listening. It's about the medical insurance, Mom, Roberto lied smoothly. He'd perfected the art of lying to his own mother. And the house. We need some roof repairs done before winter, and the insurance needs your signature to authorize the workers. You know, paperwork. Ah, the roof, I murmured, looking up at the glass ceiling of the greenhouse. Yes, leaks are bad. They cry inside the house. How is the house, Roberto? Are you watering it? What? You don't water a house, Mom, Roberto said, frowning impatiently. The plants, silly, I corrected gently. My ferns, my garden. Are they still alive? Yes, everything's perfect, Julian cut in, his voice shaking. Exactly how you left it. A lie. I knew the garden was dried out, or worse, destroyed by construction machinery. But I needed them to say it. I needed them to build their own cage with their own lies. That's good, I said, clasping my hands. I worry so much. Sometimes I dream they sell it, you know? I dream a big yellow machine, like a monster, eats my kitchen, and I scream but nobody hears me because I'm so far away. Roberto stiffened, loosened his collar. A drop of sweat ran down his temple. Those are just nightmares, Mom. Nobody's selling anything. But we need you to sign this, to protect the house. That's it. He slid the papers across the rustic table. 3 documents. I recognized them, even cleverly worded with tiny print and dense paragraphs meant to confuse. The first was a broad general power of attorney. The second, authorization to sell property without any accounting required. The third, the one that made me clench my jaw until it ached, was informed consent for my permanent transfer to a high-security long-term care facility. They wanted to lock me away and throw away the key. I can't see well without my reading glasses, I said, pushing the papers slightly away. Read it to me, Julian. You always read so nicely in church. Julian went pale. He looked at his brother for help. Mom, it's a lot of legal text. You won't understand any of it, Roberto said, tapping the table with his finger. Just sign here, where the X is. Trust us. We're your sons. Who's going to take better care of you than us? I took the pen he offered. A heavy Mont Blanc, black and gold. My hand trembled. This time, I wasn't pretending. It trembled with rage, the pure, raw fury of watching my firstborn treat me like an animal led to slaughter. And the doctor? I asked suddenly, stopping the pen inches from the paper. That doctor from the capital says I'm fine to sign, but Nurse Solange says sometimes I forget who I am. If I forget who I am, how can I sign as Clemencia? Roberto let out a dry, nervous laugh. Mom, for God's sake, you're not crazy, just tired. The doctor already signed his part. He says it's best for you, that you need to be calm, not worry about material things. We'll handle the burden. You just rest. The burden, I repeated. My house is a burden. It's a depreciating asset. Roberto snapped, losing patience. Look, Mom, just sign already. We're hot, we're hungry, and we're in a hurry. If you don't sign, the insurance won't pay, the roof collapses, and we lose the house. Is that what you want? You want to be the one responsible for losing Dad's legacy. There it was. The emotional blackmail. The low blow. Using Rogelio's memory against me. I looked at Julian. Julian, I said softly. Look at me. He raised his eyes. They were wet. Do you also think I'm a burden? Do you also want me to sign so you can sell the house to that construction company and split the money? Roberto jumped to his feet, knocking his chair back. Who told you that? He shouted. His mask of the worried son had shattered. Now he was the cornered businessman. Who's been filling your head with nonsense? You're paranoid. It's the dementia. Nobody told me anything, Roberto, I answered, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I set the pen down gently. Mothers know everything. We know before it even happens. You're delirious. Roberto roared, red with anger. Julian, say something. Tell her to sign. Julian looked at me, and for a second I saw the little boy who used to come to my bed after nightmares. Mom, he started, voice breaking. Roberto's company has debts. A lot of debts. If we don't sell the house, he could go to jail. And I need my share for the divorce. Honor left me. Shut up, idiot. Roberto shoved him hard on the shoulder. I stood frozen. Julian's confession hit me like a blow to the chest. But there was no time for comfort. This was surgery. The tumor had to be cut out to save the patient. So that's it, I said, slowly standing up. I was no longer hunched. I stood at my full height. My eyes locked onto Roberto. It's not my health. It's not my well-being. It's your failures. You want me to pay for your mistakes with my roof. Roberto looked at me, and for the first time, he saw it. He saw the change. He saw the dirt on my hands, not as filth, but as strength. He saw the clarity in my eyes. And he was afraid. Give me the paper, he growled, lunging to grab the folder. You're going to sign it. Sign it, or I swear I'll have you declared incompetent tomorrow. I have the judge in my pocket. I'll lock you away somewhere you'll never see the sun again, Clemencia. I swear it. Are you threatening me, son? I asked, feeling the adrenaline turn my blood cold. I'm promising you a very dark future, he said, stepping closer, trying to intimidate me. I smiled. A sad smile, but full of bitter victory. I already had everything I needed. They had confessed the debt, the intent to sell, the coercion, and now a direct threat. I looked toward the back of the greenhouse, toward the wooden wall of the tool shed. I think we've heard enough about your plans, Roberto, I said. It's time to reap what you've sown. What the hell are you talking about? Roberto asked, looking around, confused. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of wet earth and justice. I'm talking about the harvest, I said, clear and firm. The silence after that word lasted only a second, but it felt eternal. It was the silence before an explosion. The instant a trap snaps shut. Roberto and Julian looked at each other, not understanding. Then they heard it. The sound of a wooden door opening at the back of the greenhouse. Heavy footsteps on the gravel. I didn't move. I stood there in front of my sons like an old oak that had weathered every storm, watching their faces crumble as they realized the crazy old woman from the garden had set the perfect ambush. The silent execution was over. Now came the noise. The shed door creaked open, dry, like a dead branch snapping underfoot. Roberto and Julian spun around in unison, necks stiff, like puppets yanked too hard by their strings. Out of the shadows stepped Dr. Barrientos, a commanding man who never needed to raise his voice to fill a room. Despite the suffocating heat, he carried his jacket over his arm, his shirt crisp except for a faint line of sweat at the collar. He walked slowly, with the confidence of a man used to courtrooms, not greenhouses, and placed a small digital recorder on the rustic table, right next to Roberto's leather folder. Its red light blinked steadily, an unblinking accusing eye. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Barrientos said, his voice a deep, calm baritone. Roberto went white. Not gradually. Instantly, like someone had cut off his blood supply. The red of anger and heat drained from his face, leaving it the color of old wax. "Who the hell are you?" Roberto stammered, trying to recover his aggressive businessman posture, but his voice cracked, coming out high and shaky. "This is private property. Security. I'm Dr. Arturo Barrientos, criminal attorney and legal representative of Mrs. Clemencia," he answered, pulling out a business card and sliding it across the table with 2 fingers. "And as for private property, I have express authorization from the administration and my client to be here. What I don't have, Mr. Roberto, is patience for con men trying to coerce elderly people." Julian collapsed into his chair, as if his legs had been cut out from under him. He covered his face with his hands and let out a strangled groan. He understood instantly. Roberto, on the other hand, kept fighting reality, like a cornered animal biting at the bars of its cage. "You have no right to record anything," Roberto shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the recorder. "This is illegal. This is a private family conversation. Recording is legal when the person recording is part of the conversation, or when a crime is being committed in real time," Barrientos said, unfazed. "And believe me, what I just heard fits perfectly into the definition of extortion, psychological abuse, and attempted fraud against an elderly person. I'm promising you a very dark future. Wasn't that what you just said a minute ago?" The silence that followed was dense, almost unbreathable. A fly buzzing against the glass ceiling sounded like a helicopter. Then Anselmo stood up from his bench. He took off his straw hat with deliberate slowness, adjusted his shirt, and walked over to stand beside Barrientos. "And I," Anselmo said in his raspy old smoker's voice, "am Anselmo Torres, retired notary public, registration number 42. And I testify as an eyewitness to the complete mental clarity of Mrs. Clemencia, and to the coercion you two just committed." Roberto looked at Anselmo, then at Barrientos, then finally at me. His eyes darted back and forth, searching for an exit, an argument, a lie that could save him. There was none. The trap had closed with surgical precision. I stood still, feeling a strange calm settle in my chest. For months I had imagined this moment, rehearsed my words, pictured their faces. But the reality surpassed any fantasy. Seeing pure fear in my oldest son's eyes, the fear of being caught, exposed, gave me a mix of satisfaction and a grief so deep it had no bottom. I walked slowly toward the table. My footsteps were firm on the gravel. No more limping. No more hunched back. "Sit down, Roberto," I ordered. It wasn't a shout. It was a sentence delivered quietly. He obeyed almost by instinct, collapsing into the chair next to his brother. I picked up the leather folder with the documents they'd brought for me to sign. I held it up. "So this is what I'm worth to you?" I asked, looking them both in the eyes. "A few signatures. A roof to sell, to cover up your vices and your failures." "Mom, please, you don't understand," Julian began, voice breaking with tears. "Silence." My voice cracked like a whip through the humid air. They both jumped. "I have been quiet for 5 months. I swallowed your contempt, your lies, your pills meant to dull my mind. I let you treat me like an old piece of furniture cluttering up your perfect lives. Now, you're going to listen to me." I threw the folder onto the table with disdain. The papers scattered, showing the clauses of my imprisonment. "You thought I was crazy," I continued, walking around them like a judge in front of the bench. "You thought old Clemencia would wither away here, staring at a wall, waiting to die. But you made the mistake of forgetting whose daughter I am, and whose wife I was. You forgot I built that house brick by brick with your father, while you two slept in golden cradles." Roberto tried to speak. "Mom, the financial situation is critical. If we don't sell—" "I don't care about your financial situation," I cut him off, leaning over him. "You're 50 years old, Roberto. 50. If you played at being a big businessman with money you didn't have, face the consequences. You wanted to sell my house, the house where your brother was born, the house where we held your father's wake." "It was the only solution," he whispered, head down. "It wasn't the solution. It was the easy way. The coward's way. The way of a parasite that devours its own host." I turned to Barrientos and gestured with my hand. He nodded and pulled out a thick, stamped document, far more formal than my son's scribbled legal papers. "Dr. Barrientos, please explain to these gentlemen the new legal situation," I said, crossing my arms. Barrientos cleared his throat and laid the document in front of them. "This document," he said in a professional tone, "is a full revocation of all powers of attorney. It was signed by Mrs. Clemencia 3 days ago, in front of an acting notary that Mr. Anselmo was kind enough to bring here. It cancels any previous authorization you may have had over her assets, bank accounts, or medical decisions. Furthermore, we have filed a preventive lawsuit for fraudulent management, and requested a forensic audit of the last 5 years of accounts that Mr. Roberto managed on his mother's behalf." Roberto looked up, horrified. His hands began trembling uncontrollably on his knees. "An audit," he repeated, voice strangled. "Mom, if they do that, they'll find—" "I know," I interrupted coldly. "They'll find the missing funds. They'll find how you used my savings to pay for your trips and your cars. They'll find the theft, Roberto. Because that's what you did. You stole from me. I'll go to prison," he shouted, jumping to his feet, eyes wide. "Your own son. Are you going to send your own son to prison?" I looked at him without blinking. In another life, that plea would have shattered my heart. I would have run to sign anything to save him. But that woman died the day they put me on a one-way flight. "You sentenced me to a prison," I said, pointing toward the greenhouse walls and the residence beyond. "You sentenced me to be forgotten, to be alone, to save your own skin. You declared me insane when I was perfectly sane. You drugged me. And now you ask for mercy." "He's your son," Julian mumbled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Pathetic in his weakness." "Yes, they're my sons," I said, feeling tears burn my eyes, but refusing to let them fall. "And that's exactly why this hurts more than anything ever has. But God doesn't punish with a stick. He punishes with consequences. You built this fate yourselves. I am simply letting the law of the harvest do its work. If you sow the wind, Roberto, you reap the storm." Barrientos stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Roberto and me, like a protective wall. "Gentlemen, the audit will proceed. But Mrs. Clemencia has one offer for you. One, and only one." Roberto and Julian looked at the lawyer like shipwreck survivors spotting a piece of driftwood. What offer? Roberto asked, desperate. I spoke. You will leave here right now. You will never come back to El Romanzo. You will never call me again. You will never come near my house in the city. Dr. Barrientos has a restraining order ready to file if you try to contact me. And the house? Roberto asked, unable to stop thinking about money even in total defeat. The house stays exactly as it is, I said firmly. It's mine, and it will remain mine until the day I decide what to do with it. Maybe I'll donate it to a foundation. Maybe I'll burn it down. But you will not see a single cent from any sale. But Mom, the debts will kill me, Roberto groaned. I walked up to him one last time. I placed a hand on his cheek. It was cold and damp. Then work, son. Work like your father and I worked. Start from zero. Sell your car. Sell your fancy apartment. Sell your watches. Learn what it means to earn a living with the sweat of your own brow, and not the sweat of your mother's. I pulled my hand back as if it had burned me. Now get out. Roberto stood frozen for a moment, staring at me like he didn't recognize me, searching for some trace of the permissive mother I used to be. But all he found was Clemencia, the woman who had survived exile. Julian stood first. He didn't look at me. Didn't have the courage. He grabbed his bag and stumbled out of the greenhouse, fleeing his own shame. Roberto took longer. He gathered his papers with clumsy movements. He threw me one last look, a mix of hatred and respect I had never seen in him before. You're going to regret this, he muttered through his teeth. You're going to die alone here. Better alone than in bad company, I answered with a serene smile. Out. Barrientos insisted, pointing to the exit. Before I call the local police for trespassing. Roberto scoffed, turned, and walked away fast, trying to hold on to a dignity he had already lost long ago. We heard his footsteps fade on the gravel. We heard the slam of the luxury car door. We heard the engine roar and drive off down the dirt road, taking with it the toxicity of my past. When silence returned to the greenhouse, my knees gave out. I gripped the table to keep from falling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind an ancient, deep exhaustion. Anselmo came over and offered me his arm, steady and gentle. Sit, Clemencia. Breathe. I sank into the chair Julian had been sitting in. The air smelled of earth, of tomatoes, of life. I did it, Anselmo, I whispered. I did it. You did it masterfully, ma'am, said Dr. Barrientos, packing away his recorder. I've never seen a defense so dignified. Those men had no idea who they were dealing with. They were dealing with a mother, Anselmo said, placing his hand over mine. And there is no force in nature more terrifying than a disappointed mother who decides to stop being a victim. I looked at my hands. Still dirt under the nails. Old hands. Spotted, wrinkled, but no longer tied. What happens to them now? I asked, looking toward the door they'd disappeared through. Fear will do its work, Barrientos said. Roberto will be too busy trying to save himself from his creditors to bother you. And Julian? Well, Julian is a follower. Without his brother pushing him, he won't dare come back. I nodded. A tear rolled down my cheek, but this time, it wasn't pain. It was relief. Like an iron corset I'd worn for years had finally been unbuckled. I felt light. Magda must be worried, I said, wiping my face. And I need to water the peppers. With all this commotion, they're drying out. Anselmo laughed. A dry, brief laugh, like crackling leaves. You're incredible, Clemencia. You just disinherited your sons and saved your fortune, and your worry is the peppers. Peppers don't betray you, Anselmo, I said, standing up slowly, but with my back straight. Peppers, if you care for them, feed you. Children, well, children sometimes grow crooked, no matter how much good soil you give them. I walked out of the greenhouse, followed by my two guardians, my two angels in suits and linen shirts. The afternoon sun hit my face, bright and pure. In the distance, I saw Magda on the porch, watching us anxiously. I raised my hand, a sign that everything was fine. She smiled and gave me a thumbs up. I had won. Not just the legal battle. I had won something far greater. I had gotten my name back. I was no longer Grandma, or the old lady, or the burden. I was Clemencia. And I had 74 years of experience surviving storms. That evening, as the sun set, painting the sky violet and gold, I sat in my favorite rocking chair on the porch. I took Rogelio's watch from my pocket and held it to my ear. The ticking was still there. Constant, faithful. You saw it, didn't you, old man? I whispered to the cold metal. I didn't let them sink us. I told you, nobody sinks us. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. The air of the countryside, the same air my son swore was so calming, finally tasted like peace to me. But not the peace of a graveyard, the peace they wanted for me. It tasted like the peace of a warrior resting after victory, cleaning her sword, ready for the next sunrise. Because my life hadn't ended at El Remanso. It was only just beginning. 3 months after that confrontation, I asked Barrientos to take me to the city. I needed to see my house one last time. The drive was quiet. The noise and chaos of the city hit me like a slap. I had forgotten how gray concrete could be. When the car stopped in front of my old house, I felt a knot in my stomach. There it was. The black gates. The front garden my sons had let dry out. The windows shut tight, like blind eyes. I got out of the car and opened the lock with my own keys. The rusted metal screeched in the empty street. I walked in. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and abandonment. I ran my hand over the furniture, covered in white sheets like ghosts of a past life. I went to the kitchen, where Roberto had once called me a burden. I climbed the stairs, the ones they said were too dangerous for me, with a firm, steady step. I walked into my old bedroom. Everything was the same. And yet, nothing was. This house wasn't my home anymore. It was a museum. A mausoleum of memories belonging to a Clemencia who no longer existed. Barrientos waited respectfully at the door. Should we arrange for the move, so you can come back, Dona Clemencia? I looked around. I looked at the walls that had held my laughter and my tears for 50 years. And then I thought of the greenhouse. I thought of Anselmo, waiting for me to go over the accounts. I thought of the smell of wet earth in the countryside, and the satisfaction of watching a seed sprout. No, I said, and the word came out light, freeing. I'm not coming back. Then. The lawyer asked, surprised. Should we sell it? No. Better. Rent it out. Let a young family fill it with noise and life. Let children run on these stairs. And with the rent, we'll build a new irrigation system for the garden, and pay better nurses for Eulalia. I walked out of that house without looking back. I closed the door, and with it, I closed the chapter of my life as a lonely widow. I handed the keys to Barrientos and got in the car. Take me home, doctor, I said. Take me to El Remanso. The return was triumphant. When I arrived, it was dinner time. Anselmo was waiting on the porch, impeccable as always, with 2 glasses of red wine on a small table. I thought the city might pull you back, he said, offering me a glass. The city is noise, Anselmo. Here I have music, I answered, taking the wine. We toasted under the orange light of the sunset. To the harvest, he said. To freedom, I corrected. A year has passed since that day in the greenhouse. Roberto is still tangled up in lawsuits. I hear he works some desk job in a dingy office now, barely earning enough to rent a small room. Humility came to him late, and by force. Julian wrote me a letter a month ago. He didn't ask for money, just forgiveness. I haven't answered yet. Forgiveness is a fruit that ripens slowly, and I'm not in a hurry to pick it. Maybe someday. I'm still here, in the countryside. My hands are rougher than ever. My skin, darker from the sun. But my heart beats with a strength I thought I'd lost at 40. I'm 75 years old, and I run a business. I have a companion who reads me poetry in the evenings. And I have the absolute certainty that no one will ever again decide for me. Sometimes, when the evening comes and I sit down to rest after a long day, I think about all the women my age out there right now, sitting in some chair, feeling invisible, feeling like they're in the way, signing papers they don't understand just to please children who don't even look at them anymore. To those women, I say this: don't believe your life is over just because the calendar keeps stacking up pages. Don't let guilt, or a mother's love, turn you into a martyr for your own blood. Dignity has no expiration date. If you feel them pushing you toward the dark, toward the corner, toward silence, scream, bite. Plant your own garden, even if it's in the middle of a desert. Because I learned, the hard way, through pain, that old age is not the end of the book. It's simply a new chapter. And we, only we, hold the pen to write it. Don't let anyone take that from you. I looked at my watch, Rogelio's watch. Tick, tock. Tick, tock. Time keeps moving. But now every second belongs to me. I got up from the rocking chair. Anselmo was waving at me from the garden. Looked like the squash were ready. I smiled, adjusted my straw hat, and walked down the porch steps without holding the railing. There was a lot of work to do, and I had all the energy in the world.